All right, we are live for Dynasty Saturday Night 5. If you're listening on the Going for Two live audio podcast feed, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. If you're watching here on the video feed, whether that's YouTube or Facebook or whatever, just, do the things like comment, notification, all that jazz. So as you can see, we're without Josh tonight. He's with family doing the holiday thing, I suppose. And it's just me, just a solo show tonight. Wasn't too sure what I was going to talk about. Had a lot of things kind of going on in my head, and I pulled a few um, from the Going for Two Discord as well. So, we're going to do the usual, list of five, to talk about Dynasty fantasy football. And probably won't be the usual hour long affair because it's just me. But we'll see because I've been known to talk. But before we move forward with our lists of five and all that jazz, we're gonna do the thing about the thing with our buddies at Underdog Fantasy. The show is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, industry leader with best ball, in the off season. But now they've got an early peak at playoff best ball. They've got the Dog Bowl, Battle Royale, all that jazz when it comes to DFS on the weekly slates. Of course, they've got sports besides football, baseball, hockey, basketball, all that, and they got the pick'ems, that you can do, the higher lower for, yards and receptions and that. And so why am I talking about this? Well, if you're a new account on Underdog, you can use the promo code GF2 and you will get a first deposit match of up to $100. If you're watching here on the video, we have a nice shiny QR code for you to scan. Either way, you can also go to underdog.com, go to the Underdog app. If you're a new account, deposit as much as you want and up to $100. Well, $100, up to $100 of that deposit will be matched by our friends at Underdog if you use the promo code GF2. So, it's that time of year in Dynasty where it's maybe a kind of time to talk about trade deadlines and why you shouldn't have them. I'm not going to go off on a rant. I'm not going to go off, on a tangent here. But a couple of the things that I have on my list of five are going to be related to trades. And if you do have a deadline, it's probably around now. And if you don't, the contenders are kind of making their stretch run for the playoffs. So there's a lot of trades going down anyway. So a couple of things that I'm going to be talking about are going to be related to the trade market and then maybe a couple stashes and stuff like that. So the first thing I want to talk about is contender buys, right? So, we're hitting the stretch run. Contenders, as I said, are looking to add some pieces. This is the time, if you're not a contender, to shed these pieces. If you haven't shed them already, obviously. And this is the time, if you're a contender, to try to get a good price on some of these pieces. So, there's a bunch of names out there, pretty much, any running back with a pulse, but especially guys like Eckler or Pollard or Josh Jacobs or Monty, Saquon. Derrick Henry's interesting, right? Because we're getting into that stretch of the season where he usually performs very well. He's, not what he used to be, but he probably will see a spike in production. He's got a very good matchup this week against Carolina. So if you're looking for a running back before tomorrow's game start, he might be a name to look for. Also, guys like Kamara, Mixon, James Conner, Aaron Jones, the names, right? If there's a running back with a pulse and he's getting used, chances are he can be useful for you for your stretch run as a contender. I think at receiver, there's probably fewer like obvious options, but Cooper Cup, you could probably get at a pretty good price at the moment. It remains to be seen how he's going to do coming back from this injury. But, again, before the games start tomorrow, you can probably get a pretty good price on someone looking to get out from Cup if they haven't moved him already. The thing is, people who haven't moved out from these players either are like me and just haven't had the time, have too many leagues, or, they were kind of thought they were in it, ended up being a pretender. Maybe they had a couple injuries and now they're falling out, right? So these are some of the last people they're holding on to. So you might have a chance to get even better players now than you did a couple weeks ago, because the people who were holding on to these people, these players to compete, right, are now starting to trade them off, whereas they were maybe willing to trade lesser players, a couple weeks ago. So, like I said, Cup, Thielen, Hopkins, Diggs is interesting. He's had a couple down weeks. Might be a good price on him. He's around 30 years old, so he's somebody that a non-contender might be looking to shed. Obviously, Tyreek, you're going to pay a premium for that. He can score 30 a week, but he is of a certain age where for a number of teams in the league, holding on to him really doesn't make sense. Keenan Allen, I think 50-something% of the opportunities now are flowing through Eckler and Allen on that offense. He's 31 already. You can probably get a pretty good price on him. Same thing for, a guy like Mike Evans. He's a free agent as well, but, he's been performing somewhat surprisingly well with Baker this year, although he is Mr. Consistency. Again, with that age of 31-ish, you're going to probably get a good price. Cortland Sutton, probably a little bit of touchdown cologne so far in 2023, but he seems to be Russ's guy, especially when Russ is sort of, forced out of the pocket and looking to create. He's looking for Cortland Sutton, and is certainly, at least in 2023, kind of taking that step ahead of Judy, and I think is a guy you can still get a pretty good price on. Same thing for maybe some lesser pieces like Curtis Samuel or, Odell Beckham. These are guys who are putting up useful fantasy points. And when you have injuries or, you want depth or, that sort of thing, there's still a few more buys, in the next couple weeks. These are guys you can look for. There's also probably quarterbacks that fall under this category. Most of us, especially, me and Josh, the way we talk about Dynasty here on Saturday Night 5, we're talking about Superflex, right? Most of us playing Superflex. So, those guys don't get moved often, but there's windows, right? And so, there might be a window now where somebody who's falling out of contention or has been out of contention is looking to move off a productive quarterback, but one who may not fit their build, one who may have some question marks, one who, 2 years from now, am I going to want him on my roster when I'm competitive, that sort of thing. So I think a guy like Dak stands out. Obviously, he's gonna cost you more than he did like a month ago, but he's around 30 years old, and you're gonna probably see some non-contenders looking to get out from under a 30-year-old quarterback, even in a super flex. Jared Goff, he hasn't, I think, signed that extension. He probably will get an extension in Detroit, but again, he's one of these guys who, it's not sexy, right? He's 28, 29 years old, is performing well, but is not the type of guy who if you're sitting there as a non-contender and you're not going to compete for at least a year, he's not a guy where you're like, oh, I have to hold on to him. He's going to be part of my core, right? You can spin him off for a good return and still get good value, yet also as a contender buyer, you can probably get a fairly reasonable price, on Goff this time of year. So he's a guy to look out for. And Russ, I know it's kind of been ugly here or there, at least as you're watching the games and that sort of thing. But as far as the fantasy numbers go, Russ is having a fine season. And you need your quarterback 2, quarterback 3. Maybe you had a Burrow injury, right? He's a guy who you can probably get for a reasonable price if somebody who's not contending is still hanging on to him. In the tight end position, a guy like Kelsey, there's some bad vibes, right? There's some bad buzz around Kelsey. People are saying, oh, he isn't what he used to be and that sort of thing. And, the KC offense doesn't have to perform as well this year with such a good defense. But, here's your opportunity, to maybe get a good discount then on Travis Kelsey, who's always capable of putting up a big boom week down the stretch. Dalton Schultz has good chemistry with CJ Stroud. He's a guy that you can probably get for a reasonable price. Kittle, he's, I think, 30 already or 29. And, again, a guy who he's boom bust. He has these spike weeks and that sort of thing, but he's a big name and, is on a great offense. And I think, is certainly somebody who can, if you're selling, get you a pretty good price. But if you're buying, you're buying I'm grabbing a 30-year-old tight end and taking him off your hands before the deadline, or you held on to him too long price, right? So that's another guy to take a look at. I think that's kind of fairly obvious, but for example, in one league, I think it's we started 2 tight ends, right? But I traded Kittle in a 4th for Kyle Pitts in a 2nd, and yeah, it's a bit of a gamble, because, the Pitts usage and we've seen him maybe not be himself with the injury this year, but I'm getting that 2nd on top of it. He's still super young and uber talented. So, that's a bet that I'm willing to make. So, you don't have to necessarily be bereft of a tight end in a tight end premium when you move a guy like a Kittle or a Kelsey, and you can get back, maybe a guy like Pitts, right? I think Cole Kmet probably is the type of guy where I think he fit better with Bagent, right, than with Fields, but I think is still proven enough, even if it's a little touchdown dependent, that he's a viable tight end and certainly one that you can get at a pretty reasonable price. Logan Thomas has had a really good year. He's a guy coming into this year where I said, okay, age, injuries, like he's falling apart. Cole Turner is going to ascend and kind of take that job. And I was wrong. He's clicked with Howell. He's had some very useful weeks. He's been useful in the DFS streets, that's for sure. So he's a guy to go after. And then finally, Jonnu Smith, right? We see him getting love, maybe not so much the last couple of weeks, but certainly used a lot in the Arthur Smith offense. We talk about Kyle Pitts being a tight end. He's really, the way they're using him is really more like a wide receiver, and Jonnu Smith is really more, the tight end 1 there. And so, he's definitely getting some looks. He's put up some useful weeks. He's someone who, before the season started, people couldn't get rid of. So, so the price has gone up from there. But still, I think as we're getting close to when the contenders are trying to get the non-contenders are trying to get rid of their players, either because there is a deadline or because they've held on to them too long and they just want to get these points off their rosters as they race, toward the bottom to get as high a pick as they can. You're going to maybe get a reasonable price on a lot of these guys, including Jonnu, which kind of brings me to the sort of flip side of that. It's not necessarily going to be, non-contender sells or that sort of thing. It's more about, listen, if you're a non-contender, and I'm like that in a lot of leagues, right? Just the pattern of the way my dynasty leagues have shook out. I made some mistakes over the last couple of years. I took over some ugly orphans and they're not fully reconstructed yet, etc. So there's a good percentage of my rosters that are not competitive at the moment. And now you're looking at, week 12 and you're trying to get these points off your roster. If you're a non-contender like me, I'm saying this so I can hear my own advice, right? It's time, and it probably has been time for a few weeks, to take a bit of a value hit to make a sale. I mean, nothing insulting, right? But you want to get these points off your roster. You want to get more liquid by getting the picks. You want to make bets maybe on some younger guys or some injured guys in return. And so maybe take a bit of a value hit, maybe get 75 cents on the dollar because, you don't want to be stuck with a guy like Austin Eckler in the offseason, right? So, that's something that I think non-contenders, need to really internalize and think about. I know it feels bad sometimes, but hey, that's the breaks, right? For me personally, it's just been a time thing. I have like over 40 leagues, and I just haven't had the time to just go in there and give each league the attention that it should be given. This year especially, has been tough. You've seen us not do a lot of episodes. We've both had a lot of life stuff going on. I had mental health stuff, physical health stuff. I've been doing a lot of political work and that sort of thing. And you know, now before you know it, it's like week 12, and there's some of these guys where it's like, oh, I haven't traded him yet. All right, well, and then maybe you're gonna have to take a hit, right? Because you held on to him for that. So, that's item number 2 on our list of 5 is the corollary to these contender buys is, as a non-contender seller, be willing to get 75 cents on the dollar to make the sale, get the points off your roster, get the different type of assets that you want in return. Right? Item number 3, back to contenders. Think about playoff schedules when you're looking to be making these trades or waiver wire acquisitions and that sort of thing. So I took a look at all 32 teams' schedules for weeks 15 through 17, the fantasy playoffs. I identified at least 13 teams that I think have a pretty favorable final 3 weeks. I'm not going to read you all 13 teams, right? But some especially stand out that are interesting because the schedules are really good and they have good pieces, right? Good fantasy pieces, right? So Houston, right? Everybody, we're raising, CJ Stroud up the ranks in our quarterbacks. We've seen Tank Dell be a huge hit. I was wrong about him for sure. Nico, a guy I've liked for a while, has certainly been solid, right? Schultz, Singletary has had some productive weeks. Dameon Pierce is coming back, right? They get Tennessee twice, right? Tennessee in weeks 15 and 17, they're a pass funnel. So you're going to see, you're going to see, opportunity for good performances out of the pass catchers, but also like they haven't been as tough against the run as we think they are, especially the last few weeks. So while there's certainly an advantage to passing against them relative to running, it's not like they're completely stopping the run. So even if you have a chance to pick up a guy like, I don't know, give somebody 2/3 and grab Devin Singletary, he's going to get Tennessee twice, and then in between there they get Cleveland. Again, okay, they're a good defense, but who knows, right? By week 16, what kind of juice Cleveland has left with Deshaun Watson out and a few more weeks of DTR at quarterback. Same with Tennessee, right? Like their season is over. They're already playing for next year. Listen, I'm not saying professionals aren't going to put in the effort, but we know what happens in those last few weeks, right? Philadelphia. Right, if you've got Hurts, if you've got the pass catchers, or if you're looking to buy, Devonta Smith or something like that, or they get Seattle, the Giants, and Arizona. That's a pretty juicy schedule. The last 3 weeks. San Francisco gets Arizona, Baltimore, and then Washington, right? Who's just bleeding fantasy points in the passing game. So those are some teams to target. Like if you don't already have those pieces and you're looking for what pieces am I acquiring, those 3 have a really good schedule. Also, just some things that stand out to me as well. Bijan, there might be a situation where, I don't know, for whatever reason, you can get a good price on Bijan because he's an underperforming rookie. Now, I don't know what situation, right? Because if you're not contending and you haven't moved him, you're probably holding him. And if you are contending, you might want to get rid of him, right? But if there's a market for Bijan, or if you have Bijan and you're worried about him, Carolina, Indianapolis, and Chicago last 3 weeks. So, throw that in for London and Pitts as well. Chicago is tough against wide receivers, but they're giving it up a little bit to the slot, wide receivers, tight ends, pass catching running backs, that sort of thing. So, Bijan certainly fits that. Carolina, not too many pieces there, but if you have feeling, they have a good schedule: Atlanta, Green Bay, and Jacksonville. Green Bay, right? Go get you some Jaden Reed, or if you're maybe getting a buy low on a Christian Watson, thinking he might pan out the next few weeks. I think he's kind of a sell. I don't have too many shares, but either way, just Aaron Jones, right? If you're getting a cheap Aaron Jones, hoping he can put together a few healthy weeks down the stretch. Whatever the case may be for your Green Bay pieces, you're looking at Tampa Bay, tough against the run, but they get burned in the pass. Carolina and Minnesota. Jacksonville, there's a lot of relevant pieces there. We're hoping Ridley can come into form, right? But they get Baltimore, Tampa Bay and Carolina. The Rams, right? Puka, if you're getting some cheap Cup, if you're getting some cheap Stafford, who I should have put on the quarterback list from a non-contender, you're seeing Washington, New Orleans, and the Giants. New Orleans, if you picked up Kamara, right, or you've got Derek Carr rattling around there as your quarterback too, you're looking at the Giants, the Rams, and the Bucks. Pittsburgh, right? Not too much going on there. Deontay Johnson, Jalen Warren's coming on strong, right? So if you've got any of those guys, or you're acquiring those guys as a contender, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Seattle, it's not a cake schedule, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Tampa Bay, if you've been having to use Baker because of injuries, or if you are getting some, or have already gotten some cheap Mike Evans with the age discount, whatever the case may be, Rachaad White, certainly that projectable volume is starting to come to fruition, right? You're seeing Green Bay, Jacksonville, and New Orleans, right? Tennessee, again, if you bought in on Levis and you're riding him out, if you're getting some cheap Derrick Henry for the stretch, if et cetera, D-Hop, right? If you're getting some cheap D-Hop for the stretch, you're looking at Houston, Seattle, and Houston, right? Houston particularly vulnerable against the tight end, right? Like, I know Chig's been a disappointment, but weeks 15 and 17, you might think about rolling Chig out there as well. All right. So that's point number 3. We did contender buys. We did take a value hit if you're selling, or be open to it. And then we did favorable playoff schedules for contenders. We got Kyle in the chat. I'm not great at the start sit stuff, but let's see here. Full PPR flex, Keaton Mitchell, Gainwell, Donta Freeman, Chandler, Tyler Boyd, Gabe Davis. That's a lot of guys. Gabe could have a real ceiling week this week. Philadelphia's secondary is not as good as people think. Just overall, their defense hasn't been as good as people think. But he's going to be doing that really on big plays and TDs. From a PPR perspective, like, you might be better off with a Chandler, right, who can catch passes and run. Keaton Mitchell, probably third out of that group. Yeah. Trying to think. I mean, Boyd's got Jake Browning as quarterback, right? So, I don't know that I want to do that, right? Yeah. All right. Point number 4. This is maybe more for people who are not contending. So back to that side of the coin. These are guys that you're going to want to buy or stash, figure out some way to grab because their value could go up either in the offseason or, or next year. So there's a few different categories that you can lean into for this. One of them is like underperforming rookies. People who, especially if there's a contender, they don't really have a reason to hold on to some of these guys. And, chances are some of these guys can turn it around, have a better year next year. Maybe a veteran piece in front of them moves onto a different team, whatever the case may be, right? But, Bryce Young, obviously underperforming, and you can probably get a pretty good price for him. I think I moved Godwin, Keaton Mitchell, and a second and a fourth, I think maybe. I don't know. For Bryce and Rashid, or Bryce Rashid and a fourth came back. Either way, Rashid Shaheed, that is. Either way, that person needed some points. The second, I don't like to give up, but I think it was 2025. And also, you get the 101, right? You get Bryce, who was picked first overall in the NFL draft. I'll take that chance, right? Tank Bigsby, a guy I'm taking an L on. I didn't think Tank was better than Etienne. I thought he was more well-rounded and probably still is, but he's clearly not. He clearly is taking time to learn the NFL, and the NFL is moving fast for him. So he's definitely somebody whose price has gone down and who will probably have a bigger role and a better year next year. Although it's not guaranteed, running backs are kind of, disposable these days in the NFL. But again, the acquisition cost isn't much. Same thing for a guy like Kendre Miller. Certainly has had injuries, that he struggled with this season. He's another candidate to have a much better second year. Izzy Abanikanda, a guy who I really liked coming out. Definitely a little raw at, I think you've seen them move off of Michael Carter. Dalvin Cook isn't going to be back. They're going to probably give Izzy some looks down the stretch. So maybe get him now, before he does get those looks. But I think either way, he's going to have a role on that team next year. He's a fifth rounder, so they don't have a whole lot of investment in him. So they could certainly bring in somebody else. But again, it's about what's the acquisition cost. These aren't necessarily guys that I'm saying go out and like throw thirds out for, right? Because those are liquid. But maybe you're getting them thrown into a trade, right? Or maybe you have a shallower league and they're on the waiver wire, right? I think JSN is starting to come along, so he's probably no longer, a buy low at this point. But certainly, I think you can get a reasonable price on him for maybe from a contender who would rather have somebody who's scoring more steady points week to week than JSN, who's essentially running as the wide receiver 3, with a sort of, questionable middling offense and middling quarterback. Rashee Rice, he's somebody I talked about last week. He's not necessarily underperforming. I'm very intrigued by Rashee Rice. I think he could really, catch on and his value could increase. But again, with Kansas City, it's basically been Kelsey and Pacheco, and everybody else. And everybody else isn't doing much. And they haven't had to score as much, right? So again, what's going to be the acquisition cost? Can you get him added to a trade? Marvin Mims, we loved, some flashes from Marvin Mims. I think he's very good. He's still one of my favorite 2023 rookies. Again, get him thrown in. Maybe it's a low price. Maybe he's, on the waiver wire in a shallow league. Michael Mayer, tight end for the Raiders. We've certainly seen him come on a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But, let's face it, it's the Raiders. AOC is throwing him the ball. What's a good price? Kick the tires. Maybe you can get Mayer added to a trade when you're moving a veteran tight end, to somebody. And, kind of the same thing with Musgrave. He's shown flashes, but now he's on IR. He's not going to be useful to a contender for a few weeks. What's the price on him now? can you get him added to a trade, right? The second category that you want to look for when you're looking for, buys and stashes as a non-contender is, guys that are going to have a better role next year, right? Whether that's for reasons like, Garrett Wilson, who, hopefully will have a competent quarterback next year. Chris Olave, who doesn't seem to be clicking with Carr, but we know has gobs of talent. You've got to, I think, bet that situation gets straightened out. But again, maybe you've got a contender who is, they're getting skittish going in the playoffs. Maybe you can give them a guy who's still valuable, who's still kind of young, so they're not taking a big age hit with Olave, but they're getting those points right now, week to week. Maybe you don't have to add much to it. Maybe you've got one of those veteran running backs lying around. You piece a couple things together, right, and you get Olave. Hollywood Brown, right? What a disappointment. I mean, I'm from a DFS perspective, it just seems like people just roll him out there in high ownership percentages, the last, 5-6 weeks, and he just keeps disappointing for the most part. But, you have to think when we, what we saw those 6 games without D-Hop last year, where he was really heavily targeted from Kyler, is not like a mirage, that'll get figured out. That yes, McBride is very good, and yes, Michael Wilson is a decent alternative, and yes, Dortch is undervalued and underrated, right? But Hollywood Brown's going to have a role, and you can probably get him for a good price. Again, he's not doing much for a contender right now, right? So when they have that pressure of the playoffs, of that possibility of winning that money, right, you can maybe get a good price for Hollywood Brown. And then same thing with Kyle Pitts. I think he's going to have a better year next year. Something's got to give. I know people are tired of Pitts truthers like me talking about Kyle Pitts, but he's got gobs of talent. He hasn't looked himself this year as far as like movement goes. A lot of great peripherals coming into this year, so we know that there's definitely something there. He's still young, right? He's younger than some of the rookie tight ends this year. And something's going to change, right? He's either going to have a better quarterback, a better coach, both, right? I'm definitely going for Pitts if I can get him. I mentioned that Kittle Pitts trade that I did, where I got Pitts in a second for Kittle and a fourth. It's the exact kind of deal I'm talking about, right? Like, that contender wanted points. They wanted to go for it. They wanted to win the money. I could afford to, roll the dice a little bit on Pitts and got a nice second on top of that. And then there's I think lesser known guys that might be, waiver wire pickups or throw-ins and trades that, I think have a value bump coming, or could have a better year next year. A guy like Trey Palmer or Raheem Jarrett on the Bucks, that team's going to look different next year. Mike Evans is a free agent. So I think they could step in and have a role. Palmer especially has flashed better than Jarrett. Tyler Scott on the Bears. Darnell Mooney's a free agent. He's, probably unlikely to stay, although, the Bears do have a lot of cap space. Tyler Scott would be, a guy I would take a look at. We've obviously seen guys like Jaylen Warren and Keaton Mitchell pop off recently. So, they're probably going to have, a good role next year. Eric Gray is interesting, right? We don't know if Saquon's back. I don't know how long you can stay with Breida as a backup. So in a world of zero RB where, guys are one injury away, from a role, Eric Gray, has a pretty well-rounded skill set, even if he's not dynamic and explosive. Drake London, same thing, with Pitts, something's going to change, either the quarterback, the coach, both. Michael Pittman's a free agent. So maybe I should put him in the free agent list. But again, a guy who, he's going to get Anthony Richardson back, or he's going to move on to a team, right? Where, maybe the situation is even better, right? So he's a guy that you might want to grab. Probably not, as available or as inexpensive as some of these other guys. Tutu Atwell, right? Who knows what's going to be happening with Stafford and Kupp on that team next year. right? We've seen him flash, especially when Cup has been out. So he might be a guy you can get added to a trade because, again, he's not doing much for contenders now that Cup is back. So, maybe a guy you can get added to a trade. A.T. Perry and Greg Dulcich, I think, round out this list as well of guys who have flashed and for whatever reason this year maybe not are doing great, but are certainly low acquisition costs. Get them thrown into trades, that sort of thing. Another category of guys you should buy or stash are impending free agents, right? Because there's a chance, that their situation improves next year. I looked at the free agent class for all four positions. It's pretty bleak. It's not like it was last year, like especially last year with running backs. So Baker and Minshew are free agents. Tannehill's a free agent. Running back is just nothing. I mean, Salvin Ahmed, maybe he lands somewhere and they have a pretty full backfield. AJ Dillon, not very productive or efficient, but again, in a zero RB world, he's a guy who's probably going to have some form of contingent upside somewhere. Antonio Gibson, right? We don't know with a new regime coming in Washington if he's going to be the fit there. We certainly know that he's got some ability. He's flashed, particularly in the passing game. So he's a free agent. He might have a better situation. Rico Dowdle, same thing, right? Like, again, low acquisition cost, get him thrown into a trade. Receivers, again, it's pretty bleak. Tyler Boyd, Kendrick Bourne, Darnell Mooney, I think is intriguing I think he can be a good wide receiver too on a legit offense. I don't know that the offense is very legit at the moment in Chicago. We've seen Aguilar and Josh Reynolds fill in as good veterans. Gabe Davis, KJ Osborne, Gerald Everett, Hunter Henry. Like I said, it's bleak, but these are, when we think about, value bumps or guys that might have better roles next year, there's always the chance that happens with those guys because they're free agents. The final category of, sort of buys and stashes especially for teams who aren't contending, are the injured guys, right? So, a lot of these guys, the price is not going to be great, but it's a matter of you're onboarding no points and you're giving contenders points. So maybe you can work out a trade for some of these guys, right? Obviously, Richardson, Burrow's been moved a lot recently. I did a few, I think in like 3 separate leagues. I got essentially Burrow in a second for Justin Herbert, right? Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, like, I've never been a big fan. I think he is a little overrated, but let's face it, he's got the contract security, which, means less in the NFL than it does in other places, but it's there. You kind of have to call this season a wash. He is one of 7 people to throw for, what was it? Throw for 3,000 and run for 700, right? Or something like that, right? So, only one of 7 people to do that. I mean, he's got a good coach that can put people in a position to do well with their skill set. So, I think if the O-line improves and all the injuries and all that sort of, like, Daniel Jones is probably, has a very good price right now relative to what it was before. Nick Chubb, right? Like, I've seen a lot of people go after, Nick Chubb and get him cheaply. And I get it. Like, I have to put him on this list, right? He's a big name. He's injured. He's not doing anybody any good as a contender right now. I don't know, right? That the knee injury wound up, as bad as we thought it was at first, after a report that it wasn't as bad. And he's like 28 in December, right? So, like, I don't know what I'd be willing to give up. He'd probably have to be part of some bigger deal. Dobbins, Achilles are worse than ACLs, but, he's a decent age and a free agent. So, maybe he gets a prove it deal as a backup. And again, in a world of zero RB, any running back with a pulse. Um, let's see here. Obviously, Andrews, and Dallas Goedert, to round out that list of injured guys that aren't doing contenders any good, right? So we did contender buys. We did sort of a philosophical thing for non-contenders, being willing to take 75 cents on the dollar. We did favorable schedules for contenders. Then we went back to non-contenders for buys and stashes. And now I'm going to end with 2024 rookies. But don't worry, I'm not going to dive into the individual players. This is just my advice to start your rookie research early, whether you're a contender or not, right? I started it around that weird space between Christmas Day and New Year's, when nobody knows what day it is. And I think I was ahead of the game relative to most of the field, if you will, in fantasy football. But there's certainly people who started it early. A few weeks ago, I started my rookie spreadsheet. I started even a little bit earlier this year, right? And it's important, I think, to get a lay of the land and know as much as you can. Now, last year I probably went too hard in with the rookies and really did deep dives and consumed a lot of information and did a lot of research. And maybe I don't have to go as hard this year, but the point is, a lot of the time the currency that we're using is draft picks, right? And we're thinking about, well, what do those draft picks mean, right? We're starting to get to the stage of the year where we can somewhat reliably, tell that a pick is going to be early or late or mid. And so, who are those players, right? Like, what do we think is going on, right? How good is this class? Are there better wide receivers than running backs? Who are, right? And I think you should be able to get a grip on that as early as possible. What I do is I start a spreadsheet, and it's got a page for each position. I got the list of players. I got their vitals, measurements and combine and RAS score and that sort of thing. And then just sort of like there's a column for, what's good about them, column for where are some areas of growth, right? I add in some of the analytic thresholds, or I'll add in some notes where I'll see some disagreement in the fantasy space over guys. So it's things that I want to look out for when I keep doing research and that sort of thing. But and then I come up with ranks. And the great thing is for us as dynasty players, I know that a lot of us want to become these like rookie experts, and that's cool, right? And if that's your thing, whatever. But like, as being more of a dynasty player and not a rookie expert, talent evaluator, that sort of thing, the good thing is there's a lot of people and a lot of content creators out there who are ready to help you with this sort of thing. The rookie people, the Devi people, that are hustling and grinding this stuff, year round. And like, they're already thinking about the next year's class when half of us are turning around and saying like, okay, who are these rookies? Right. So, get started on that, tap into resources. If you're not, into college football, if you're not a talent evaluation expert, if you're not, right, off outsource that, right? Pay a few bucks to somebody's Patreon and get some real deep dives. There's a lot of folks out there. I've mentioned guys on podcasts. I've had guests on podcasts, guys like Matt Hicks or John Laub or Brandon Lejeune, or the guys at Debbie Royale, who also do the Dynasty podcast at Football Guys, and they publish their own guide. Obviously, Matt Waldman's rookie scouting portfolio, right? There's a million things out there for you to tap into that, and I would start I would start putting that on your radar if you have not already, doing it now, and get started on that. I think it's important to know. And I think the other thing too, as you're doing this rookie research, keep in mind like the NFL and how it's changing, right? And on a few shows I've talked about this year, the idea that there wasn't data that had caught up to the little guys doing well yet, but we knew that the NFL was changing. But we also knew that in a response to the defense's response to the little guys, there were some teams trying to diversify, trying to run more, power gap runs, more 12 personnel, that sort of thing, right? What we've seen, I think, this year is, especially with the style that the defenses are playing, with the bend and don't break, and with trying to, keep explosive plays down, and willing to let teams dink and dunk. What we're seeing, I think, is that that the guys who are in space, especially when I think about the wide receivers, that they are a better bet to make than they used to be. And so, like, again, it's not a 1-to-1 where you're going to say, oh, well, Tank Dell hit, so this year's 5'8", 165 wide receiver is going to hit. But it certainly, paves the way and makes the case. It's proof of concept that a guy who has that size but is talented at separation and getting open and that sort of thing can be very fantasy viable. Can break away from that general rule of we don't bet on guys that size, right? So, keep that in mind as you're sifting through things in your rookie research too. And what are these NFL teams looking for? And how are they valuing things like the running back position, right? Like, think about it, even though this running back class, there's no Bijan, right? I think one could argue that the 2 through whatever in 2023, like the non-Bijan guys, is comparable and to the 2024 class was. But now what we've really seen, if you weren't on board already, the world of zero RB in both NFL and fantasy has slapped us in the face, whether we wanted it to or not, right? So, a guy like Travion Henderson might be the only dynasty rookie first round pick, not NFL first round, dynasty first round, right? A guy like Braylon Allen, a guy like Blake Corum, whatever. Like, these guys are now in this world of zero RB, not going to be first round dynasty rookie draft picks, right? They're going to be those second rounders, right? So, I think those are things to keep in mind as you're doing that rookie research. So, we did our 5 lists of 5. We did our contender buys. We did our philosophical approach for non-contenders and selling. We did some contenders looking at like strength of schedule for the playoff run. We went back to non-contenders and did the idea of some categories of guys and also names of guys to buy or stash for the offseason or for next year, expecting a value increase. And then we ended with everybody, contenders or not, start your rookie research early, start it now, be ahead of the game. And also, as you're doing it, keep in mind how the NFL is changing and how some of the data maybe has not caught up with the last couple of years of changes in the NFL, because the changes can be fast. All right, that'll do it for Dynasty Saturday Night 5 on the solo show for this Thanksgiving weekend. We miss you, Josh. We love you. You can follow Josh on Twitter at Rotonaut, and his rankings and articles are up at goingfor2.com. You can follow me at ffjunkie_ on Twitter. My articles and rankings are also up at goingfor2.com. I don't do really in-season writing, almost zero, and especially this year I've just been super busy. But I do want to, in the off season, maybe do sort of a debrief of how things have changed, the landscape in the NFL, how that changed, and how that's affecting Dynasty. I don't know, probably write at least a few articles in the off season. I'll do some rookie profiles. I did a bunch of those last year, so probably do that. You can also find me on the Dynasty Fever podcast. We've also been a little inconsistent with the schedule there, also because both of us have life things, but I do that with Jesse Schneeman. You can follow us on Twitter at Dynasty Fever Pod. That's an audio only, and it tends to come out between like Thursday and Saturday. We record usually like Wednesday or Thursday. And you can find Jesse on Twitter at Jesse_DWZ. He's from the Dynasty Warzone family of content, does a great podcast over there called Dynasty War Games and that sort of thing. Going for two. We have everything for you on the website, redraft, dynasty, DFS, that sort of thing. We've got pretty much a podcast every night of the week, every day of the week here live, and also then later uploaded on our audio feed. You should also join our Discord. It's huge. There's a lot of channels. There's like every category you can think of in fantasy. There's constantly people asking, trade advice and, talking about player acquisition. And so a few of the shows have their own channel, including ours, and it's free. You can do that by going to goingfor2.com, and in the bottom right, there's that little purple thing. You can click on that and you'll be part of our Discord. All right, that'll do it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And even though I hate them, in honor of Josh, go Irish.